Thanks everyone for joining the Inland Empire ARMA chapters meeting. Today we have a great topic, great presenters, not just one, but two. That's right, double trouble for us today. We have Sandra Serkis, and she's the co-founder and CEO with Valora Technologies. Also, partner in crime, Jennifer Nelson, VP Strategic Solutions with Valora Technologies. We've got some great content coming today. So to respect everyone's time, we'll start here shortly. Just want to let you know that these two wonderful ladies gave us permission to jump in the chat, raise hands, and if you need to unmute, please feel free to ask a question as needed. This is some great stuff we're getting into today. So if you have questions, we want to make sure we get to those. And also much later in the presentation, the chapter always does a nice little raffle. So an extra little goodie there at the end of today's presentation. But with it being 12 o'clock now, we're going to go ahead and get things started. I'll turn things over to the team right here. Sandra and Jennifer, thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much for having us. We're excited to be here. As Jim mentioned, my name's Jen. This is Sandy. As we go through this webinar, totally invite you to hit up over the chat. If one of us isn't speaking, the other one will be watching the chat, or raise your hand and one of us will interrupt the other one. So don't worry about that. So today we're chatting, it's a webinar mashup. It's two giant topics kind of mashed up into one. So managing records retention with auto-classification and managing data minimization and least privilege with auto-classification. So hang on your hats, because it's going to be, there's a lot to take in here. So if you do have any questions, we're happy to chat after the fact as well. And we'll also send, so it's being recorded, awesome. And we'll also send some slides around too. So you've got these if you do have any questions after the fact. All right. Oh, my slides aren't working. Oh, there we go. So we've got a bit of an agenda just so we kind of keep ourselves on track. I'm just going to give you a 30-second rundown about Valora, who we are, what we do, how we do it, why we're even here. I'm going to talk about auto classification a bit and a little auto classification 101. Talking about auto classification specifically for records management and how that can help. Talking a little bit, moving into data privacy and data minimization. What is it? And how can you apply a least privilege approach to data management in your organization? Where is that intersection where data minimization and records management collide? Where are those kind of similarities in both of those practices and the overlap? And then if we've got time, we may or may not, we'll talk about how to get started and how to get the right people around the table in your organization to start to prioritize or reprioritize data minimization and a data privacy approach to overall data governance and information management. So just a little bit about us. We have an auto classification platform, which some of you may or may not have seen, but what it does is find, identify, auto classify, and automates the defensible disposition of content, regardless of where it lives across the enterprise. And we kind of take an approach, a combination of technology and methodology. So been in business for 20 years, and Miss Serkis here knows what she's talking about. We've got the platform is the technology side, and we've got a great professional services team. And what most of our clients get is this 360-degree view or 30,000-foot view of all the content across their organization. But that is the end of the infomercial. That's just a little bit of background to know that this is where we come from. Kind of know a thing or two about auto classification. So what is auto classification? So everybody has, doesn't matter if you're in, government, corporate, pharma, healthcare, everyone has the same problem. Unfortunately for Microsoft, not everything in the company lives in Microsoft, right? So we've got cloud and on-prem systems that are all unstructured data. We have a bunch of communication apps like Zoom, what we're using now, Outlook, Teams, Gmail. We've got SaaS web applications like Salesforce, Workday, and whatnot. ECMs and ERPs that could be structured and unstructured, cloud and on-prem structured, so databases or data lakes, and then some stuff that sits in the web. And the big question that most records, IG folks, data privacy folks have is, what do we have? Where is it? What's out there? Does it contain such sensitive data? Is it a record? Who owns it? Who's a custodian? What retention policy do I apply? Or how do I even know where to even start? And almost most importantly, what is the risk of all of this unknown data being out there? And when you employ an auto classification solution, it will take a pretty systematic approach to understanding what's out there. So the first thing it will do is it will go find everything. It will create a bit of an inventory and analyze everything that it's finding out there with a full text analytics, not just looking at the metadata, looking at all the content itself, and create that inventory so you can clearly see what's out there if it's a risk. We can tag and classify it. So it's auto classification. So we're not asking a human to say, is this a contract? The auto classification platform is doing it itself. It's reading it and making those decisions based on the content. And then, of course, defensible and automated disposition. Once we find something that's out there, how do you remedy it? Do you need to move it? Do you need to quarantine it? Do you need to delete it? Do you need to tag it that it contains personal data? Do you need to tag it that it's a record? And then kind of live out its lifecycle management. And then once all that's done, you kind of rinse and repeat. It's an ever-going cycle. The second that you take a snapshot of your data, it is outdated the second later because we're creating content, we're sending emails, we're moving and creating content around. So this monitoring and auditing will ensures that every single of these disparate systems and every contact or record that's created in there is handled appropriately. And once you have that, now you understand. I know what I have. I know exactly where it is. I know where my risky business is, and I know how to handle it throughout the course of its life cycle. So true auto classification. And we say true auto classification because you can auto classify by different things, but really it is the machine doing it. It is software that performs the analysis and the disposition. And it answers for every single piece of file it comes across, content it comes across, it answers the question, what is this thing? And what do you want me to do with it? And the first is finding those attributes, applying rich metadata. Down here over on the right, quite often this is the standard system generated metadata we see. So file type, creation date, last modified, maybe who last modified it and where it lives. But it really tells us nothing about the file. So what applying rich metadata will do is kind of do a full text analysis of each file. And rather than, last modified date, we can now pull out effective date or signatory date or renewal date or termination date. Rather than just knowing that Jen changed it, 3 weeks ago, if the document is about something, maybe it's an employment contract or an email or there's signatories, we can now kind of pull out that rich metadata. And it's that rich metadata that really gives us that full picture of a document. And then we apply recognition algorithms, and that really determines the doc type. So if it's pulling out names or terms or salary numbers or things like that, it's going to say, wait a second, this is an employment agreement, or it's a service agreement or a termination letter. So depending on what it says, an auto classification platform will determine what type of document it is, and therefore how it should be handled. So it can also automate the disposition algorithms. And it can be as simple or as complex as you need it. So if it's a document and it's a contract and the date's before, 2027, then mark it as active, retain it for 7 years. And that's just an example. It can be, again, hierarchical. It can be if, then, what, that, and really what it provides, what we used to call as the 8 pillars of information governance. Because once you understand what the thing is, what to do with it, how long to keep it, when it should be destroyed, how it should be destroyed, who needs to approve it before it's destroyed, where it needs to go if it's in quarantine, and if it contains personal data, all of these things can be managed once you know what it is and what to do with it. So that includes auto classification. It includes ROT, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, includes retention and records management, also legal hold, e-discovery, data privacy, which is the biggie, which we're going to absolutely dive into today, and also data security and migration. So it kind of solves every business unit's problem, because it doesn't matter if you're in records, or it doesn't matter if you're in legal or in IT, you kind of need to know what everything is. Because when you're looking at a file in a file share or SharePoint, I have no idea what this is. It could be anything. And if I'm relying on humans to auto-classify or to classify things, I literally, as a human, have to open this, read it, and figure out what it is. But an auto-classification tool will literally read it for us. So it's going to read it and analyze it and start pulling out those data facets. It's a contract. Its effective date is the 1st of February. It's between the company and this party number 2. What is it for? What are the terms? What's the expiration date, the renewal date, the signatory date? It'll pull out all those things, and then it will determine itself what it is. It's a contract. It belongs to ARAP. We need to keep it past the expiration date, not the last modified date, not the save date, not the day I emailed it, but the actual expiration within the contract itself, and then delete that after authorization. The sensitivity is business confidential, so make sure only the appropriate people need and can see it. And then, do we retain it? Do we delete it? When it's ready to be deleted, are those automated workflows that will allow that to happen in an automated and cohesive way within a system? So, and then it turns that into this. So now you've got this single pane of glass. It's gone out and analyzed every single file in all of those disparate systems, and it's brought it up right here. So at a glance, you can see what contains personal data. What's out there that's past retention? Am I in compliance with my own retention schedule? What out there belongs to Jen? What out there contains personal data about somebody? So it really gives you that very interactive 360 view of your entire content. And most organizations use auto classification kind of we often see it for 3 big use cases. The first is data governance, and that's kind of the beginning of what we're talking about here is the ROT processing, finding the records from the ROT, records management, and automating those kind of things. The second is privacy and compliance, which we're digging into as well. And that is making sure that while we're governing the data, that we're also keeping in mind any privacy regulations or regulatory compliance that we need to have with regards to data or with regards to privacy. Excuse me. And the third is legal and finance and HR. So certainly looking for things that are on legal hold, lifting them when they need to. Mergers, acquisitions, that's a big one as well. Finding in a big bucket of data, if you're acquiring or if you're divesting part of a company, what information needs to go with that, or what information are we taking in that we need to now absorb into our entire data set. So those are, I would say, the big bucket things that we see auto classification being used for mostly. And in records management, the 3 big use cases certainly are to identify and tag content with that rich metadata. So again, what's a record? What's not? What can we get rid of? What do we have to keep? Where are permanent records gonna live? When something's ready to be deleted, how do we do it and why? And that's setting up for the disposition and lifecycle management in the middle. Making sure that everything, it's great to have a retention schedule, of course, but the ability to enact that proper retention and making sure that you're in compliance with your own schedule, that's key. And then the third one is advanced lifecycle management, which is really helping everybody else in the organization as well, helping with legal hold, knowledge management, the folks in M&A. You are kind of the gatekeeper. Once you know everything, you know everything. You can be the gatekeeper of that information. And retention, when we talk about retention, it is on a spectrum. It really is. Do we keep it or do we get rid of it? Dispose of it, we can get rid of right away, we know. On the other side, on the permanent record side, it's something we have to keep forever. And then there's everything else in the middle. which is legal hold. So do we keep it? And if we keep it, for how long? And when it's lifted, do we have the ability to now lift that and everything kind of goes through its regular life cycle or management cycle? And then we have data subject access requests, which we'll probably talk about when we get into data privacy. But this is an idea of looking for certain documents and removing them on demand. Is there an ability to do that? And then all the stuff that's just business stuff, it's all active. Do we keep it? Do we move it? Do we quarantine it? When do we remove it? So it really is this, ongoing, continually having to reevaluate everything that's in our data source. But the big question always comes back to, what is it? Where is it? When do I delete it? Why is it there? And what am I going to do when it's ready to be moved? And who has access to it? And is something out there that's risky or not? The typical rot and retention classification tags that you can apply to data when we're thinking about records management and retention is certainly rot. Is it rot? Is it not? And if it is, what kind? Is it redundant, obsolete, or trivial? And if it is obsolete, what makes it obsolete? Oh, this is, past retention, or this was a draft. If it's trivial, it's a non-record. If it's redundant, it's an identical duplicate. So having the ability for an auto classification platform to be able to see and analyze at that depth is very important, especially when you get to duplicate types. Just because, you can have identical duplicates, and that's great. That's an easy find. What's a little harder is to find the functional duplicates and the near duplicates. And by functional duplicates, we mean, somebody saved a Word to a PDF, where they're any kind of electronic system will see that they're two very different file types, but the content is identical. So we identify identical dupes, functional dupes, and then near dupes, which can be customized to whatever a business would need it to be. So, maybe version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of a document as an example. Identified record class automatically. So source, custodian, all of those things would go in there. Expiration date. Again, the ability to choose an expiration date, just not on the date last modified or date created, but the actual content that lives, that is the content is about. And then the ability to apply retention periods and expiration handling. That's important as well. Having an auto classification solution that just tells you what things are and what to do with them is great, but the ability to actually enable that in a defensible way is extremely important. And on that retention handling side, a good auto classification tool will automate that retention. And you can see here just a kind of a smattering of different, I'll say, categories. So we can see at a quick glance, what are the record classes? What is that expiration handling, the retention period? That second one there shows us the rot, what's rot and what's not. If it's rot, what kind of rot, and then the rot detail. If it's obsolete, why is it obsolete? It's past retention. And the ability to see that at a 30,000 foot view, and then the ability to drill down, and it can tell us a little bit more clearly, what is the expiration date? How do we handle this when it expires? And then all of the detail around that as well. So how does auto classification help? It identifies and tags, so it kind of separates the two. What is content of business value? What is stuff that we can get rid of that's kind of just bulking up our data stores? It removes the guesswork, and it removes that responsibility from humans, because humans are bound to make mistakes and humans are lazy, and we will go with the path of least resistance. It's certainly a cost savings, not only storage costs, because we know how much rot is in data and cloud systems. So we're saving on cost, but we're also saving on human cost too, because, you don't have to have a million people go in there and try to auto classify manually. Creates instruction at the content level. Productivity goes up. It's always looking for new and edited content. So you know that your content is current and you know that it is clean. And it's defensible, which is extremely important when it's making decisions and logging those and moving information to and fro. And then Yeah, I say set it and forget it, but it's really not forget it because a good auto classification solution will update as your business updates and evolves. You may have new policies that arrive. You may have new regulatory compliance that you need to adhere to. So having something that's always running in the back and always updating and taking into consideration those changes in your business is key. And auto classification here, it helps, yes, with RIM, but it will also help with data privacy and data minimization. That was a forced segue, guys. Sorry.
Right on it to me. All right, so this is where Jen's going to pass the baton to me, and I'm going to speak to to data privacy and data minimization. So Jen, you can go ahead and since you're a slide maven today.
I do.
So most people know what data privacy is. It's essentially kind of the practice area around personal data. So just a quick note, personal data versus PII. Personal data is the broader term. It's essentially data, the viewpoint is from the owner of the data, you. You are the data subject. The personal data belongs to you. PII is similar, but it specifically has that angle of can be used to identify back to a person. So sometimes those are used interchangeably. I tend to use personal data to be a broad spectrum of any data that originated from or was collected from the data subject. So I tend to use more of the GDPR terminology, just so we're all on the same page. So we're actually going to dive down another layer now from data privacy into data minimization, because this concept is really gaining traction both in the regulatory and I think kind of in the court of public opinion as well. So if you're not familiar with this, data minimization is essentially a practice that kind of right sizes the kind of data that you collect, the kind of data that you maintain, and when you are going to dispose of that data. And it specifically ties the disposition back to the point of origin or the point of collection. And that's the big change from, say, kind of vanilla records management, where the kind of life cycle of the record is based on essentially what the document is, or perhaps who generated it. And then there's a time window, which is sort of like the last possible day you may maintain that. Data minimization is kind of almost the inverse of that. It's what is the longest possible window in which you will keep something. We're going to talk more about this difference in kind of time frame between traditional records management and data minimization. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but it is part of the definition. So the first thing is the ability to, this practice of why are you getting this? Why do you have this? Why do you still have this? And when are you getting rid of it? On what basis? Okay, so this notion of lawful basis comes up over and over. All right, Jen.
Sorry.
Okay, so basically data minimization is becoming more and more of a critical workflow in the whole InfoGov space, because it's yet another form of remediation or cleanup, use whatever word you like, data hygiene, that has a little bit more of a you must do as opposed to you should do. And this is one of the reasons that we think records folks really ought to be embracing this concept, because it gives you a little more fuel to the fire, to the argument I'm sure all of you have been making for years, saying we really need to clean this up, we really should do this. Your terminology can start to change to we must do this. Okay, yep, go ahead, Jen. So next up we have, we're kind of peeling back the onion. So we started with data privacy, then we went to data minimization. Now we're one in again, which is least privilege. This is the concept of And you can think of it like, in like kind of like spy movie, Who Has a Right to Know? It's kind of like that. And it is borrowing from a little bit more of a data security genesis. And it's basically, it comes from the idea of who's allowed to have access, like a login access either to a system or maybe to a folder or an area of SharePoint, something like that. And so what is happening as we absorb that term and that concept into information governance, it's going down a layer. It's going down from just you may or may not pass into the application, or you may or may not pass into the sub area. And it's going down now to the data, it's the document itself, or the record itself, or get ready, to sub layers within a single document. So if you think about a document that has personal data in it, maybe that personal data has to be redacted, like you see here, but the rest of the document is available for public viewing. So you can see kind of what's happening, this idea of least privilege. And least privilege is basically, it's kind of like lowest common denominator. How must the document be stored, viewed, retrieved, managed, based on whoever has the least amount of privilege, the least right to be able to access it. And that has to be setting the bar, because that's the sort of the weakest link in the chain, if you will. So this kind of terminology, data minimization, least privilege, you will hear this in data privacy regulation. Certainly comes at these are direct lifts on the left from GDPR and from CPRA. You guys are out in California, so surely you know that like the back of your hand. But you can see that information in there and what the obligation is. California really did set the bar for the United States. They were first out with their regulations, and many other states are following suit. Here's a look. Okay, green are the ones that have already signed privacy regulation. Blue means it's in discussion, and yellow, at least it's on the table. So that's a pretty big swath of the United States. It is unlikely that we're going to see a federal law anytime soon. So we are instead going to wind up with 50 or more unique privacy regulations that we're going to have to be responsive to. If you're, for some reason, unfamiliar with the IAPP, I strongly recommend you get to know them. This is an industry organization. There's no cost to join. You can get to them through LinkedIn. They are keeping incredible, meticulous track of many different things, not the least of which is what are the regulations. And I have found everyone in that community to be incredibly knowledgeable. Their website is fantastic. These are screen shares from there. So definitely, if you're starting to think about data privacy or data minimization, get to know IAPP. Okay, so there are a number of organizations that are kind of leading the way, possibly, and Jen, you can just put these all out, possibly because of the nature of what they do. Either they're already dealing with sensitive information like healthcare and financial services, or they're used to collecting data from consumers. This is very consumer-oriented data management practice. And so, you can kind of, those are the big three on the top, but it shows up all over the place, and eventually we're all going to be responsive to it. And I will point out that it's not, when I say consumer, it's not just those who would be a customer of the organization. It's anyone acting in a consumer capacity. So of course that covers employees. The number one instigators of a DSAR, a data subject access request, a DSAR is like, I would like to know what you have on me. I would like you to forget about me. I would like to just fix the data you have on me because it's wrong. I moved. Okay. The number one instigator of DSARs are ex-employees, not customers. Okay, so most people kind of get, and by the way, we just literally, that's about 4 slides from about 60. So if you want a deeper dive, I highly encourage you to either come to Valora's website or meet me out at InfoNext in April, whatever you want. There's quite a lot more to it. There's also, when we send the slides out to you guys, just in the interest of time, we're trying to blow through slides. There are a whole bunch that we're skipping over, but they are part of the slide deck, so you will have them.
And you know what, Sandy? I think we're only, and I don't know about the rest of the length of the session, but if we've got time, we're only 30 minutes in, so we may just touch on those, because I was trying to blow by those so fast because we thought we were going to run out of time.
We were so worried. We had so much content. That's
like,
fine.
we're going to be here all day, you know. Yeah.
No, we are all ears. Keep it coming. If you've got more, please do. We've got time. We've been waiting. Thank you so much, though.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Right. So the reason that we put this slide together is because even with changing the vernacular from "we really should do this, this is good data hygiene" to "we really must do this, it's regulation," even with that, we still see some hesitancy. We still see InfoGov efforts being kind of put on the back burner. I mean, it's sort of shocking given all of this, but we still see it. So we have been trying to help folks like yourselves build the broader argument that this is not just purely a records task. It's not even a records and a data privacy task. It's all of this stuff. It is a unified InfoGov story. And so these are the reasons to undertake things like this, some of which are pretty far afield from your typical records management. Take something like environmental sustainability, right? Why is that even on the table here? Because if you're keeping a lot of excess content around, essentially the planet is paying for that in terms of processing and hosting. In terms of every time you run a search, you're essentially exerting extra cycles and electricity. So it sounds like a little bit of a reach, but if you're part of a 30,000 person organization and 50% of your content is rot, that adds up pretty quickly. So very interesting argument, not my argument, but these are things I've picked up, in the course of my studies. Each one of these has specific argument behind it as to why it's on this page, why it's part of the data minimization argument, far beyond, well, the law says we have to. So each one of these is one of those. Okay. So now that we understand a little bit what data minimization, least privilege, I didn't get into data provenance and all of that, but that's part of my talk in April. That one's a long one just on
I love these plugs, yeah.
So what we did was kind of compare the data privacy questions, the things you would naturally ask and be asked to answer in the sort of treatment, the managing of data privacy, the insurance of it, alongside records management. And what you'll see is it's really, really similar. The one big difference is the word sensitive, okay? It's only that the data privacy has this sensitivity angle to it, but otherwise all the questions, all the behavior, all the management, all the rationale is the same. And this is what we've been trying to get out there. That's why it was such a good idea to combine these two topics into a single webinar, because it really is the same story again. And both of them kind of originate from the notion that it is possible to know what you have. If it's possible to know what you have, it should be possible to deal with who's asking, why are they asking, as long as you know what it is. So we also started to look at, and there's more slides than we'll necessarily cover on this right now, but in the deck about this, about looking at things from kind of across the organization, sort of who is typically involved. If it's beyond records management or InfoGov, who do you need to kind of get on your side? So here's the litany of the folks that we find are active in these engagements. So if you haven't kind of reached out to the folks on this list, I highly recommend you do. You're going to find kindred spirits.
Oh, are you frozen, Sandy? Am I frozen? Oh my God, am I frozen? Am I frozen? I'm
Jen,
frozen.
I hear you loud and clear, but
Okay.
Sandy seems to have frozen herself
I
there
think
on the
Sandy's
side.
frozen. Oh no, she's gonna be
Or
panicking.
It's not, and she's back, and you're back.
And
There you
she's
go. Hi,
back.
Sandy. It's cold in Boston.
oh, it was me. Oh, I'm now getting my internet connection is unstable.
Of course it is.
All right. Well, I'll keep going, and if I disappear again, say something because I could hear you.
Okay.
All right. All right. So, most organizations are still, certainly in the United States, are still getting their data minimization programs and policies together. So good news, if you have a records retention schedule, it's quite similar to that, except there are some additions to it. So you have to have this notion of least privilege. Who is allowed to see this? With records, it's kind of like, it's a record. We've generally stopped short of who's allowed to see or operate that record. Data minimization does require that you have that additional kind of data point. Now let's talk about what I call intended life cycle versus record life cycle. So let's say you're collecting from me as a potential customer. This is my favorite one. You're collecting my cell phone because you are somebody at Uber Eats and I have ordered some Chinese food to be delivered to me. Okay, so you collect my cell phone, and in the nature of the transaction, you've indicated to me that we're collecting this in case there's a problem with your order. Wonderful. No problem. The Chinese food arrives. It's delicious. The payment has gone through. I've given my 5-star review. Now it's 3 weeks later and I'm getting marketing spam from Uber Eats. Why? And that's actually in violation, right? Because they said they were collecting my cell phone number for the purpose of the transaction. The transaction has concluded. So technically, if they were following kind of kosher data minimization principles, they would have deleted my cell phone number at the end of that transaction. Okay, so that is what we mean. Now, is that, the transaction itself is probably a record and my number might be tied to that, but what was sort of indicated or promised at the time of collection of that sensitive data, and how does that map against whether it's a record or not? And so this is where we're going to start to see some struggles. That's why I said on the side, things can get complicated. It's no longer enough to say, well, it's a record, so we can keep it forever. Who is going to kind of take the priority seat over the other? Is it the fact that it's personal data, or is it the fact that it's a record? I put it to you that generally the personal data is going to overrule the fact that it was a record. I don't have a legal basis for that yet. My 25 years in this business tells me that that's where we're going to go. I'm glad someone agrees with me. Personal data is going to win against it's a record. That's nice. The right of the individual is more important. So you're going to have these sort of situations where your policies might conflict with each other. The same way you already have one that you're used to, right? Record versus legal hold. You're already used to that conflict and legal hold wins. The same kind of thing is going to happen. And of course, we're ultimately setting up for the three-way showdown, right? Legal hold versus data privacy versus record. And I can tell you how that's going to play out. Legal hold wins, data privacy comes in second, record comes in third. Okay, so with that, this notion of past retention, we'll toss that around in our industry. We all know what it means. Yeah, stuff's past retention. Darn, that's unfortunate. It's a lot more unfortunate than darn now, because it's now in violation. So record retention, I mentioned this in the beginning, typically is expressed as, we will get rid of this document at the latest possible moment of X. We will retain it for its duration, and then sometimes we keep it Past retention. Why do we even have that status? We all know why, because we don't get the authorization or the permission or the tools or whatever to actually get rid of anything. So we have a bunch of stuff that's past retention. That's a major no in the data minimization universe. You should never technically have anything that is past the period of time in which you said you would keep it. So now we have this notion of minimum retention period, which is the records flavor, versus maximum retention period, which is the data minimization flavor. So what you wind up with is a window, earliest possible deletion date, latest possible deletion date, and you have to get that deletion accurately in the window or you're out of compliance one edge or the other. So now you can start to see, it'd be really helpful if you had a tool that was tracking this for you, especially as time is passing. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this just a moment ago. We all know there's rot out there. You might even be able to pinpoint a lot of it. It's not that difficult to find identical dupes. Many tools will do that. So why haven't we gotten rid of them? Authority to do so, no tools, no one will let us delete things. It was not that long ago that kind of corporate legal told the universe, save everything, save everything, save everything. And so here we are, and there was no real penalty other than, yes, storage, pain in the neckitude, but now there are real consequences. And what is further frightening about some of this data privacy litigation is that there is essentially a whistleblower element to it, where almost anyone who can uncover this sort of violation can bring suit and be compensated for it. Okay? So what? What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. Anybody here work for any of these organizations? This is a big deal. This is just GDPR. We're just starting to see them in the US for California. We're going to start seeing them elsewhere. It's really not the kind of thing that you should just shrug, not that any of you are, but that organizationally, you should be shrugging your shoulders. The more that these kind of tools become commonplace, the less we're going to be able to get away with it. Go, man, no tools. Well, that's not really a valid argument anymore. And so you're crossing into almost willful negligence there. So with that, how do tools like AutoClassification obviously help minimize these issues? So, I mean, you saw some of it. Jen walked you through how the tagging all the way down to that minute layer of what is in each file, that is going to kind of bubble things up to the surface that say, we have problems here, 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 here. It starts with, where is the sensitive data? Here's sensitive data, this one, this one, this one, or in this, repository or this custodian, what have you. But then when you start adding in that secondary layer of rules analysis, what is it? How long should we keep it? What different policies is it subject to? What's my longest period I can hold it? What's my shortest I can hold it? And therefore, what's that window? And when am I in the window? Okay, that is what the AutoClassification is, like a 1-2 punch. What is the thing? And then how do I deal with it? Including what time is it? Because how I deal with it depends a lot on time. So that is what a kind of AutoClassification, not as a one-off, not as a one-day tagging thing, but as a perpetual, I kind of think of it almost like a carbon monoxide monitor. If you have one of those in your home, it's protecting you all the time in the event that something happens. If you want to kind of think about your data minimization and records management, those bookends, the same way, you want to kind of always be in compliance. All right, we are going to get to that last section.
We are going to get started.
Okay. Jen, I'm going to send it back to you.
Yeah, totally. So how do you, sitting with your butts in seats, get your colleagues and other departments around you to help prioritize, and how do you get these folks on board? And the first is, understanding that every single piece of content is created has a different value to each group. it means something for you in records and information governance, means something else in IT. It's just a place, it just needs to be stored. Don't care what it is. Legal's very concerned, depends on what the content is. And of course, CIO and security, do we need to lock it down? So for every kind of business unit or stakeholder, there's another, question. Who owns it? Whose goal among all of these is most important? What one poses the greatest risk? And ultimately, often what it comes down to is who owns the budget? Who's going to pay for this? And so each group, knowing that they need to be in compliance with their own mandate, sometimes kind of fight with each other to say, well, mine's more important. Well, mine's more important. But being able to have this kind of vision of shared content, shared goals, it makes all content everyone's, I was going to say problem, but it's not. It's everyone's issue. It's everyone's responsibility. So that everything that is created, there's organization and control for the greater good. Everything is a shared resource, and there's a shared responsibility against all of things, not just the custodian, not just records, because they need to know where it is and what to do with it. But it really is this shared idea of shared responsibility and ultimately shared cost and shared ROI. So centralized management with those distributed benefits, that is the ultimate goal. And we say you can stand up a data minimization program in 10 easy steps because maybe it's not that easy, but it sounds easy when you do it like this. What you're going to need is, now this applies to data privacy and minimization or to straight auto classification or records management, is really an understanding of the regulations for what you're trying to achieve. You're going to need policies on the record side, a records retention schedule to document how things are going to go. You're going to need executive support. And that's what we often find, is that sometimes it hits that ceiling where, the risk isn't big enough, the need isn't big enough. You really want to get somebody on the executive team to help support and to drive and be a champion to this. You're going to need appropriate tools because humans can't do it, and certainly ongoing diligence and management. What you're going to get.
Jenny, a quick question.
Yeah.
In terms of executive support, my best advice for all of you is look for the general counsel or chief legal officer. I think out of all the kind of C-suite folks, they are the ones most focused on risk, and data privacy adds that risk element into an otherwise kind of neutral records management discussion. Adding in data minimization, data privacy pushes it pretty firmly into the risk category. So that's where I would look either CISO or general counsel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what you're going to get is, after an auto classification tool goes through and does its sweep, is you're going to get a very detailed data inventory. You're going to understand what's out there. You're going to have a better understanding, again, of the risk, and be able to tag and establish and automate those retention schedules so everything's up to par. You can remove the low-hanging fruit, because we all know those stats about rot, and it being between 30 and 50, sometimes 60%, depending on what studies you read, of an entire entire organization's data set. So removing that right off the bat is a great ROI. And number 5 there is implementing an automated retention that is privacy aware. Yeah, you're thinking about records and you're thinking about data governance, but you've got to be thinking about that privacy aspect and data minimization as well. Quite often people ask, how long does it take to set up or configure? Like, great, I want to go. How long is it going to take me? Well, entirely depends. So it can take between weeks or months, and it entirely depends on your data environment. How complex are those? Is it structured, unstructured? Is it cloud? Is it on-prem? Kind of those things will influence how long it's going to take. Second one is goals and requirements. Often it takes a long time to get the right people around the table. And, setting up a technology, the setting up of the technology takes an awful lot less time than it does to get the right people sometimes and agreements around the table. So getting that kind of solidifying those goals and requirements internally speed up that process. And of course, the amount of data. If you're a small organization, it's not going to take as long as a 30,000 employee with 30,000 mailboxes to go through. So larger organizations tend to take a little bit longer to do that baseline. And the best way to get started, it really is in a phased implementation, because right away we can start prioritizing data environments and helping get the internal stakeholders together so that we can start that planning and that project planning. We often find helpful to have a proof of concept. So we're taking a subset of data so that you can see how that data would be handled in that environment. And then implement and scale it up. With any auto classification solution, we would recommend these steps. And they're not so much baby steps, but it's, I would say, baby stepping it for getting it right, because it is machine learning technology. We want to feed it the right information. We want it to come back and we want to tweak, and we always want to optimize. So on the Delta monitoring side, again, continuously improving the systems, adding things, taking away, updating policies and compliance requirements, and then always looking for new data and edited data so that everything is always up to par and compliant. I'd just like to say that I can't believe we did that in under 6 minutes.
Fantastic. But we invite your questions. You guys
absolutely.
have been, other than John, you guys have been mostly quiet. But we're happy to answer questions on data minimization, auto classification, how's the weather in Boston, snowy. Bring it. Everybody's shy.
Oh, yeah. Don't be shy. There's got to be questions. I know there are.
Yeah. And again, we'll send this around, and we'll also send our emails too. So if you do have any questions, if you're not, if something comes to mind after the fact, then you can just let us know, and we can email you back as well.
That's often the case. Folks are not ready to ask in front of the group, but then all the questions come in. I see them after. So I'm glad you're going to share your information. Let's give them a moment, folks. Feel free to ask why we've got Jen and Sandy right here. You need to should be able to unmute yourself if you need to. Watch in the chat as well.
I will ask one of the assembled audience here, which is, was this helpful, these topics for you? Do these kind of match with what you're seeing day to day?
I would say yes. This is John. There's always a tension between privacy and records management. And like I said, the chat, it seems like the two shall become one under certain, because a lot of things you're doing from inventories and policies really can be done together. So I kind of see that as a wave of the future. And I think the number one thing for me is, you're right, legal, personal data, and then records. And that should be the order of priority. So lots of good stuff on this webinar today.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Here's one. Okay. Is there a limit on document types that auto classification can identify or analyze? That's a great question. And the answer is not really. There are document types that kind of come out of the box. They're the doc types that anybody would have: email formats, contracts, financial statements, that kind of thing. But one of the things about true auto classification is that it is tuned to each organization. So it's going to be tuned to your kind of vertical business sector. Are you in construction? Are you in finance? Are you in pharmaceutical? There will be document types that are kind of unique to those sectors. And then there will be document types that are unique to the organizations, just how they kind of create their information. So there's no limit, but there is a configuration effort. On Jen's slide that had the arrow of how long does it take or how complex, that's exactly the kind of thing that might add a little bit of complexity. But just so you know, at least where Valora sits, new doc types, new configuration things, those are pretty routine, and they're just kind of incorporated into the implementation. They're expected. So there isn't really a limit. It's more a question of, what is your environment compared to the generic? How far unique are you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Another comment there in the chat was one thing we always found challenging was including the privacy piece in the record management tools.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody was even thinking about it. And honestly, until GDPR, I mean, I think that really brought it to light. And now, again, with that kind of intersection of privacy, either privacy consuming data governance or data governance consuming privacy, it really is such an overlap. But some record management tools haven't caught up to that. So that's perhaps some of the more traditional RM platforms or tools haven't really thought about incorporating that because it wasn't important in 15 years ago.
I can speak from Valora's perspective. From my perspective, we kind of started out our lives over on the e-discovery end of things, and one of the, I guess, blessings of e-discovery, not something you'd normally hear, is that the next matter, every next matter could be about absolutely anything. So things that we would today call data privacy in the early days were just, about personnel issues or sensitive litigation type of topics. So we became very adept at finding those people, finding the unique things about the people, and then finding those unique things like a trade secret. So it was a natural evolution for us to kind of incorporate those things together. We had been tracking things that today you would call data privacy for over a decade at this point. And once we kind of realized, oh, people call that data privacy, we were like, well, we have that too. So those have always been kind of intertwined in our world. I don't know that that's necessarily the case for other providers that have come at it strictly from one angle. So that's partly why you hear us talking like that, why we're kind of, I hope, a little bit ahead of the curve on that topic.
Don't have more questions. Guests, please feel free to reach out to me, your ARMA chapter, to have these slides sent to you. These two ladies were very nice enough to share their information. And if you haven't jotted down their email and information there, feel free to reach out to your chapter here. ARMA's happy to help you out here. Again, thank you so much, Sandy and Jennifer, for sharing the content today and even putting your information out there so the information can keep flowing because we'll be sending in questions. I appreciate it. And I and many of us will hopefully see you there in Palm Springs in April. Looking forward to hearing more.